I don't think that Britain is, or the Conservative Party is, ashamed of success. I think that Britain, like the United States, is not sufficiently ashamed of failure. In other words, I think that both we in the United States and you have largely given up on the idea of personal responsibility, that behavior has consequences, and if you persistently make the wrong choice in your personal life, you are going to do more poorly. Now, it's certainly true that in the UK and in the United States, we're very much alike in this, over the last 10 or 15 years, both of us have prioritized on our economic policies at emphasizing improving demand over improving supply. The natural result of that is that both you and we give out a lot of handouts. And you can see this in so many areas of policy. Help to Buy in the United Kingdom, for example, the student loans debate in the United States, child care support here in the UK, the debate that we have recently had in the United States and are continuing to have about unproductive majors at universities, something that the UK has already been a world leader in, Harry Potter studies, that kind of thing. The mother of all giveaways, QE, which both you and we have practiced enthusiastically. All of that is intended to sort of prop up demand, make it easier for people to buy things at the expense of reforming the supply side of the market. But let's not mistake the emphasis on demand management and demand support for the underlying problem. The underlying problem is that we are not willing to say that if you don't save, if you don't invest in yourself, if you don't take education seriously, if you are not personally responsible, there is no amount of government support that is going to be able to make you successful, and there is no amount of government support that is going to prevent you from having to rely ever more increasingly on government institutions. This is a self-feeding problem, and there is no way out of it except for returning to the idea that government cannot fix the difficulties that come from a failure of personal responsibility. You see this in all sorts of areas in the United States, and you see it in the UK too. The big debate that we have in the US is your success the result of luck? The first time this really entered US political dialogue, I think, was when President Obama made the argument with the phrase, "You didn't build this." The idea that a particular bridge was built by the government and therefore all the businesses that used the bridge were not responsible for their own success. They owed it to the government and to the sort of general luck of beneficent taxpayers providing things for businesses that ended up being successful thanks to no effort on their own part. This idea has expanded, of course, in the United States. We're so good at this. We love producing these excuses into the idea that your success is determined by your gender. Your success is determined by your race, or indeed your failure is determined by your gender or your race. Now, we all know that everyone is born into a particular set of circumstances, and I'm not denying that some people start off in life better advantaged than others. But the idea that people are incapable of improving themselves, the idea that education, especially if well chosen, does not pay off, the idea that having two good parents who take an interest in their children is irrelevant to future success, the idea that the culture you work in, believe in, the idea that religion is irrelevant to all of this, and that your outcomes in life are solely determined by your gender or your color or any other factor is the most poisonous thing possible, because it ends up saying that you are powerless to make any difference in your own life, and the only alternative is government demand management, subsidies to fix your problems. This is not true. Social mobility does exist. It should be higher I agree very much with Lance that the single biggest problem that we have, not just in business, which is his area of expertise, but overall is the cartelization problem. You can see this in business, you can see this in education. The idea that the system has, I wouldn't say has been rigged, but inevitably, whenever systems exist for a long period of time, intelligent people learn how to work them for their own advantage. This is a natural phenomenon in life. Conservatives should be doing everything we can to try to break down these cartelization things. I always say, I am not a supporter of big business. I like big business, I have no problem with it. I'm a supporter of free enterprise. No one dislikes free enterprise more than really big business, because free enterprise means that big business might sometime be small business or indeed no business at all. That's not what they want. They want a system that works for them. That's very natural, that's very human, it's very normal. I'm not blaming them for it, but we shouldn't go out of our way to assist them. So my message to the United States and to the United Kingdom, because in this, as in so much else, we are rather similar, is personal responsibility first, government services that are genuinely necessary and are not aimed solely at remedying the bad decisions that people have made or stimulating consumption beyond the point where it is sort of useful to the economy and to the individual. And a rejection above all of this poisonous idea that people are not capable of improving themselves, an idea that should be absolutely anathema to every thinking liberal who began in the 19th century in the United Kingdom with the idea that it was possible to improve yourself, that the Society for the Diffusion of Useful Knowledge was a good thing, that public library served a valuable purpose. The UK was a world leader. It was the world leader in all of these great ideas. And it is such a tragedy that the British left and the British right and a lot of people in the United States have given up on these great ideas that originated in the United Kingdom and which you should be so proud to be the home of. Thanks very much.
I thought I would start by saying, I entered government in 2017, and I want to take you into the room with a senior civil servant who was my mentor, and he was the principal private secretary to the government chief whip. I'd known him for about 10 years. And he sat me down and he said, listen, the system will drown you in paper from day one unless you are a player. And then he took me through who was a player in number 10 and who was not. I will not disclose who is not. And he was very scathing. But that was the view from within the civil service. And so when we talk about the blob, and I was looking at the slogans of it crawls, it creeps, it eats you alive. This is the fact. It weighs against you. And by that I mean the body of it. It's not a person. It's not malicious. It's not even really particularly sentient. And I don't mean that as a criticism of the individuals. It is because we talk about the system, the machine that you have to fight, because often it is just running on autopilot, the code that was last fed to it by a minister or an official, or maybe just by a senior civil servant. And that is demoralizing and demotivating, whether you're a minister, whether you're an advisor, or whether you're an official, and you get worn down. And I thrived on it. I did enjoy, the fight. But these are the complaints I heard from senior civil servants and officials in general of cabinet office nepotism. You were either in the circle or outside of it. That nobody looked after your progression. If you, for example, in my sphere, if you were a legislative expert in the civil service, nobody cared to think about where to place you in the past. So no matter how long you'd served, for example, in the Parliamentary and Business Legislation Committee, you just didn't matter after that. So you lose a lot of expertise. I have a very good colleague at the moment who said he left the service because nobody could find him enough work to occupy him for more than 60% of his day. And that was just not something he was up for. There was other people that worked every day for 6 months and every weekend in the pandemic, and there was no ability for their senior managers to reward them or to make any exceptions to say, well done for that job. And the ineffective stayed in post. The bullies were moved on and often promoted. This is a place, it's a blob because nobody leaves. And in business, I remember running an agency, and the decision I didn't take fast enough was to get rid of somebody that had led to a really negative impact on the team. And the weight of that I left on them too long is a weight left on all those civil service colleagues, because we don't address quality and whether you're good at your job. So when I say we critique the civil service, the problem is it can feel to the individuals involved that it's a critique of them, of often very excellent civil servants, and it's not, it's about the system as a whole. But we've got to be wary when we make those big calls and we say we've got to chop this out. It impacts motivation, and it's the good people that leave. They get the message and go, well, I'm off, and what we end up, we hit our head count, but we're left with the people we didn't actually want. And so 5 suggestions. First, you need a plan of action, and thankfully we have Lord Maud, but you also need the senior civil service to buy into it for the longevity, because I think you're talking a minimum of 5 years to make progress. And you see it in different departments where you have, for example, in DCMS and Sarah Healy, she's attracted some really good people. You saw it on Michael Gove as well when he was in charge of DEFRA. Suddenly DEFRA sucked in a ridiculously number of good people despite it being DEFRA in sort of civil service terms. And so if you know where the good people are, they know, and they've got to look at each team and say, who are your good people? Let's get on with that. The third thing is you've got, and I'm just reading, you've got to be absolutely clear with the civil service on what is and isn't acceptable. There is, and forgive me, Kath, but whether you're the Hansard Society Institute for Government or the Constitution Unit at UCL, or you're in the civil service, there's sometimes a belief that you're neutral in opposing the government and just saying you're wrong, and this has led to politicization. And so there needs to be carefulness, and that's exacerbated by having former perm sex, former cab sex in the Lords, and them speaking, and it goes from there. So restate what is the purpose of the civil service. Say what is acceptable. Tackle woke culture. But the fourth thing is that the stick will not work alone. High-performing businesses, the ratio of praise to criticism is 5 to 1. So you must single out the people that are succeeding. You must praise them. Let the departments know. Show them. Exemplify these individuals. And finally, one thing, we need to make sure that as politicos, we do not undermine a culture where it should be about meritocracy. And I fear that what has happened at the top of the civil service has demoralized the civil service, because if the permanent secretaries, and I have a so I'm just thinking about this as, going out publicly. I have great respect for Simon Case, but the way of the appointments have been handled for Mark Sedgwill and for Simon Case, I understand, according to civil servants, undermine the belief that they can get to the top without that political intervention, and that has a problem then for the leadership of the service. So I'm unashamedly pro the civil service. I've sort of had some excellent officials, but we need to think about the whole piece.
What is your overall assessment of the Prime Minister's U-turn? What is going to be the impact upon her premiership? Is this a wise move for the Prime Minister? What risks are involved?
Well, thank you, Niall. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I mean, I supported Liz for the job she's now in, as is known, and I very much think that the country needs the direction of travel that she is trying to set. We need to move away from conventional thinking about the economy and get back to generating growth, getting incentives right, all this sort of things I've written and talked about a lot. And I know Liz agrees with all of that. Now, the problem we've got is that for the last decade, or maybe even longer, nobody has really talked about free market economics much in the public debate. The famous John Byrne Murdoch graph from the FT over the weekend shows how far the debate has moved leftwards. And we can't just pretend this has not happened. That is the environment that we are working within. These are the people we've got to persuade. And you can't just do no persuasion or explanation, land a lot of radical measures and expect everybody to sort of cheer. It's really important to explain why we're setting the right direction, persuade people that it's going to be better, explain what we're trying to do, why growth is important, why it's better for the economy. That takes time. We have to win the arguments. We've got to build the coalition. It also means not taking on fights that you can't win. I think the U-turn has been damaging because it has shown that we can U-turn. And clearly the outbreak of indiscipline over the last 24 hours shows that people are fighting for, their preferred thing and trying to get what's up for grabs. So pick your battles, set the direction, make sure you bring people with you so that this stuff sticks over the last 18 months and we aren't forced into premature defeat and risk losing everything. And that's the worry that I have as I look at the scene at the moment.
Cost of living and sort of what the government is doing, I think, can be divided into 4 areas, and within that, 2 sub-areas. The first is the short and the medium term, and then there's the long term. And I just have to say about the Benny Hill, it must annoy them more than it does us, but there we go, because it must be incredibly loud. On the short term, then the 2 things you can do are higher interest rates and tax cuts and the energy package, or rather what the government has chosen to do. There was an alternative strategy set out and defeated in the leadership election, which was to try and keep cheap money and to try and not do tax cuts. That was the Rishi Sunak approach. It gave us the highest inflation in the G7, so it was a total disaster. It's amazing how many commentators love it, but we'll come on to why lots of commentators loved it. Part of it is because there is a problem that lots of commentators have very large mortgages, so there is a bias in this country against savers and a bias towards higher inflation than the public would actually want. So, for example, at the moment there's lots of scare stories about how terrible it is that people with mortgages, etc. There was nothing when annuities were going through the floor. There was nothing when, as inflation, which is a tax on all of us, which is very unpopular. There has been obviously commentary on that, but people are not prepared to accept that the only way to drive down inflation really is through higher interest rates. The public are prepared to accept that. By 4-1, the Bank of England surveys the public would choose higher interest rates over higher inflation. And some of our MPs need to stop listening to the London-based bubble and speak to ordinary people. People hate inflation. I think we have forgotten how much inflation, which is a tax on everyone, is disliked, creates uncertainty, creates instability, and is fundamentally a negative area. The 1992 election, I think, if the Tories are aiming to win the next election, a good analysis for them to try and follow is the 1992 election. So in the 1992 election, there was a recession, interest rates were raised, house prices crashed by 20%, not a record that you think could get re-election, but actually they were re-elected because inflation fell to about 3.5%. People were prepared to say, I accept that there has been difficult decisions, but inflation has come down, the economy has stabilised, and things are getting better. So essentially, the government has made the right decision in choosing a approach that is higher interest rates, and that has been alleviated with the energy and tax package. So there is definitely a problem with communication in the Truss administration. How many people will know that the average household, a household with 2 average earners, will be getting £800 by April in tax relief? They will be getting major support for their energy bills. That is not something that has come across. There is too much of a focus on, important though it is, the growth side, which is important, but there has been a failure to communicate that there is a support package for most households, and that the alternative to doing what she is doing is the Rishi Sunak approach of higher taxes on everyone, higher inflation, and lower interest rates, which is a fundamentally unpopular proposition with all of those outside of North London with large mortgages, let's be frank. And that part of the problem is that the commentariat and those who have large mortgages are very much up in arms, rather than MPs taking a more balanced view and looking at what the polls tell you, what most people tell you. So that's the short term. Her approach is tax cuts and relief for most people, the energy cap, the national insurance cut, the income tax cut, which was supported by about 3-1 The national insurance cut was supported again by about 3-1. So these are popular tax cuts. They've been totally badly communicated. The 45p rate totally overshadowed it. People will accept higher interest rates if it's explained that this has to be done to bring inflation down. So in the longer term, however, it's important that we have a supply-side approach. There has been a definite lack of realism about how quickly that can be achieved. The markets are spooked when you hear things, when you hear the Chancellor saying, you know, this is definitely going to get growth up to 2.5% in the next couple of years. That does make people think that the approach is unrealistic, and that brings the entire plan into disrepute. I think that the areas where they have to focus on are areas where you can politically get stuff through. So, for example, in childcare, do we really need the death of child minding is a good example. Do you really need everyone to have Ofsted qualifications? Do you really need to have some of the tightest ratios in Europe? Probably not. On the other hand, things like immigration are basically dead in the water. There is no point in the government trying to bring forward reforms that will be shot down by its own MPs. It will only create greater market instability. It will only create greater chaos. That's not to say, however, things like we shouldn't celebrate things like the raising of the threshold for small businesses. So basically, it's doubled. So if you are a medium-sized business, you are now exempt from lots of regulation, not all regulation, but the regulation cap for small businesses has doubled, and that is a positive thing for many medium-sized businesses up and down the country. Or nutrient neutrality, a bonkers policy that is basically stopping huge amounts of homes being built because of natural England and out-of-control Quango that Liz Truss has promised to remove. Focusing on some of those short-term wins, getting growth moving as far as you can, while being realistic to the markets rather than saying that everything's going to be fine in the next 12 months, which I think we all know is not entirely true and spooks investors and spooks those markets. And the final bit is spending restraint. By that, again, I don't mean unrealistic things. You can't say in a massive inflation-driven crisis, we are going to not increase benefits for people who are disabled or not working in line with inflation. It's going to have to go up. I'm pretty right-wing, pretty dry, pretty free market, don't like government spending. But you are not going to be able to turn around and say when food is going up by sort of 10% plus and energy prices going up by a huge amount, even with the cap, we will not increase benefits in line with inflation. And you're better off looking at things like the overseas aid. You could scrap the VAT cut. The VAT thing they did around overseas shopper, I thought a bit weird. You should cap the cap. There's no reason why if you... the amount of energy that you should be subsidised should be limited. So if there's no reason that Rishi Sunak, probably having a nice relaxing time, does not need support in heating his swimming pool if he decides. He should pay the market price for that. There should be a cap on how much you get per person on the energy price cap, and that would save a very large sum over the next 2 years. There are things you can do that are politically acceptable, and she needs to task her cabinet with finding those and avoid making statements that then get rowed back on, which again create market instability and again create chaos. So the overall sort of cost of living approach is, her core approach is right. Higher interest rates will drive down inflation. There will be tax cuts to help people in the meantime, and supply-side reforms, wherever possible, have to be pushed through. But this all has to be done in a politically realistic way and with a lot more sensitivity that has been done, because there's no point in saying things that just spook everyone and create instability. But the alternative, if Liz Truss falls, is not some kind of stable government where inflation drops to 0% and everything's fine. The alternative, if Liz Truss goes, is complete instability for 6 months, a recession, and then a general election where the Conservative Party is crushed. So, I think Kemi Badenoch got a massive round of applause for saying it, so I'm going to copy her because I worked for her campaign. She's great. Basically, people need to get behind the Prime Minister and accept and support this, criticise individual parts, but essentially the government's approach is the right one, and there is no alternative, in the words of a different female Prime Minister.
Hi, my name is Winston Marshall. I was a co-founding member of the band Mumford & Sons, which I quit last year over free speech issues. At the time, I had tweeted about a book written by American conservative journalist Andy Ngo documenting the BLM riots and Antifa, the 19 deaths in the first 14 days of the riots. And it so happened I had tripped one of those tripwires, a totemic issue, and there are several of those such issues which have been touched on a little bit already. We all sort of know what they are. Trans is obviously one of them. So it seems to me in the arts industry where I am, there is a serious problem which is completely paradoxical, because it's a industry of people who rely on being able to express themselves, and they are censoring themselves, and it's almost every week. Last week, the band Elbow, I don't know if you're familiar with them, British band, Brit-winning band, their keyboard player Craig Potter tweeted something gender critical, and within moments his whole Twitter account disappeared. This is in the same band where the lead singer, Guy Garvey, is very happy to speak politically against Brexit, against Trump. The week before that, Spitfire Audio, which is a company that produces sort of sounds for software as other musical audio, they suspended their co-founder, Christian Henson, for tweeting gender-critical opinions and showing concern for children in the trans issue. So in the creative industries, and there's a long list, and I have a podcast where I interview various people like this, what I experienced when I quit is I had hundreds, if not thousands, of messages from people, not just in the creative industries, but across the country and beyond, expressing their sympathy and understanding with the experience of self-censorship, and that's something that's been touched up a little bit already, and where that comes from, maybe there's a deep philosophical foundation for it, but it's a serious one, and some of my co-panelists have I guess blamed the left, but I'm not entirely convinced it's a leftist problem. But as well as the culture of self-censorship, there is also two other phenomena that are pretty important. There's, I think I could call it state, coming from the state, and an example of that would be the College of Policing's non-crime hate incidents, which it seems in July that the guidelines have changed somewhat after the Henry Miller case. Nevertheless, this Quango College for Policing shouldn't be telling the police what the laws are. That should not be coming from them. They're a limited company. It's not illegal. They're not coming from a legal place. And so there are 120,000 people in Britain on such lists that if they wanted to apply for teaching roles or carer roles, and whenever those safe checking checks are to be made, those people wouldn't be able to get it. And people can be reported without having to give their name, so they're anonymous reporting. And all of this, of course, breeds more self-censorship. If people are scared of the repercussions of speaking their mind, and Harry Miller got done, I think, for gender-critical, he's a former police officer, he got done for gender-critical opinions. So there's this sort of state thing, and this ties into the online safety bill, which I'm sure we'll discuss further later. But there's also the problem of big tech. Now, I know big tech is California and America, but they have a serious stronghold here in censorship. I don't think I need to give too many details, but I'll give a couple of examples just to contradict my panelists, because Novara Media, a left-wing, no one will argue with that, company, were either shadow banned or I think they had a YouTube channel deleted at the end of last year. And Russell Brand last week had some videos taken down off YouTube. You couldn't possibly call these people right-wing. So big tech have a big power. And why this ties again to the online safety bill is because there seems to be the willingness to hand over to them the ability to censor, well, for this case, online material to protect children. Anyway, all of these three phenomena, the culture and the state thing and the big tech, are working together to perpetuate themselves and make this feeling of self-censorship all the worse.